Well, it's um, it's a milestone of an occasion. It's a whole change in the world that we are witnessing before us, and it is marked very sadly by both the stalwarts, Dr. Nadir and Ashish, succumbing to COVID. Um, I was talking with Dr. Nadir's son, and I managed to get to him as he was returning from the funeral. And he was telling me uh, about the difficulties of coping with him falling ill, etc. And then when he was in hospital, taking oxygen, etc. I think it was as if he was saying that, just let me go in peace. Um, and then his son said, he did have a very fulfilling life. He lived according to his principles. And I can tell you, having shared a room with him at the TV School of Habitat Studies for several years, so much of Dr. Nadir rubbed off one that it is very difficult uh, to put that aside in any way. And there are few things which I would like to just remember about him. First of all, he was a he was a political scientist who befriended Ashish, and Ashish befriended him when they were both teaching at the IIT in Delhi, teaching engineering students something about the built environment and architecture. Interesting. And here's a political scientist who had such a phenomenal intellectual capacity that he was better read about architecture and all the theories and philosophies that surrounded architecture during our time. Even better read, I might say, than Pogi Menon, who was also very well read. But he was an amazing, and he had a way of comprehending it all and distilling all this knowledge into some sort of a framework with which he could discuss things with us. One of the things that he insisted on is what he called linguistic hygiene. He said he's been noticing that in this profession of ours, or this discipline of ours, so-called discipline, architecture, everything is allowed to be rather fuzzy and vague, and nobody really knows what they are saying. And and he had a way of, sort of knocking you on your head every now and again and saying, I don't get what you're saying. Can you get this right? I mean, what you're saying is this, but the actual meaning may be something else, etc. And this was one of the things when he was given the task of uh, getting people to write their dissertation proposals and their thesis proposals and examining them and talking to students about it. This rigor of clarity of thought is something that he actually brought to the school more powerfully than anybody else. And he simply said that you folks need to learn how to think. Right? And I remember when we were giving his farewell speech when he was retiring from school, I said that I don't know, Dr. Nadir, whether you managed to make us think properly or not. But we certainly feel that we have learned what it is to think properly, having been under your umbrella all these years. Another thing about Dr. Nadir, which I want to recall, is that he was a chain smoker. He was a chain smoker, and he was a great traveler. He had traveled and walked the length and breadth of the country. Okay, and it was something that was ingested in him. And he could recall places and instances and histories and so on. And then one fine day, he decided that he's going to give up smoking. And it was amazing. I remember going into the room the day he had given up smoking. And I didn't, जैसे होता है ना, withdrawal symptoms होते हैं, right? That which you feel that, you know, when you're addicted to something like that, it's very tough to get out of it, and you have to do it slowly, or you suffer because of that. But such was his, what should I say, determination and clarity of purpose, that not once did he mention that it is tough. It was a decision taken and a decision abided by. And I tell you, that was, you know, that when I saw that happen, I said, my gosh, very special person who can take such decisions and just abide by them and never complain. So Dr. Nadir, I remember very, very fondly. And it was, and he loved to read, and he loved to make notes on everything he read. And then when his eyesight began to fail, and he had to use a magnifying glass to read, it was really, really painful to see that happen. Because something that was his life's sustenance was being taken away from him. And unfortunately, I think I must have met him only 2 or 3 times in the last decade or so. One lost touch with him until we heard of his passing away. Really remember him so fondly. That's Dr. Nadir for me. And now to talk briefly about Ashish. Well, very, very special person. And what I should say about Ashish is that he was a man of very deep conviction, very deep beliefs. And the belief was about each person finding the authenticity of the inner self in communion with the world. His belief was that if you can bring that forth, then only can you be a good architect. Then only can you be an authentic architect. And that is something I'm reading between the lines of so much that he spoke and he talked about in conversation and otherwise. I'm reading between those lines, and this is the big message that I get from him. The other message that I get from the way he conducted his entire life is that if you have an idea that you believe in, you must keep at it. It must always be a long-term project. It cannot be a project which is supposed to be something that you take on, you do, you complete, and you put it away. Done. No, there's no such thing. A project is something that is a lifelong process, something that will engage you and others over a long period. It will be something that will carry forward, and you would set it on its way. That's a project. That's for him is a project. And the project would always be like the TVB School of Habitat Studies and the idea of the design school later on, or the work that he did with the community and government and so on at Ayanagar, and the idea of the Museum for Architecture to be built, etc. Several projects. These are all projects that had to deal with people at large, with community, and always had to be carried through, just like Reha, had to be carried through with a bunch of people for whom he would make some kind of an arrangement so that the idea can be carried forward. That notion of a project is something that you commit for life, and you work at it no matter how gently, how slowly, how tiny the steps may be, doesn't matter, but never never let it fall by the wayside. That was also a very special quality of Ashish. Well, um, and I think in that sense, you know, um, I met him in 1980 to begin with when I was working on with a group for a conference on slums and the marginalized in Delhi that was being organized here. And we produced a number of audiovisual presentations to explain that the plight of people, etc. A big conference. And that was the start of my relationship with Ashish, which led to Griha, and then Griha led to curriculum, and that led to the TV School of Habitat Studies. The rest of it you all know. So it's been a long association with him. And I think that initial meeting and that circumstance is something that gave me personally a direction to my life's journey, for which I must say I'm indebted to Ashish.